Over the brain, by the way.
Hey, the brain.
I'm not going to do it twice. I'm not feeling that great. So, one of the things you'll see right away when you look at the brain, these folds, right? This is cerebral cortex. If you remember, I taught you guys about the neural folds, right? The spinal cord, the developing brain and the spinal cord at the beginning of the semester. How it starts out as a neural tube with neural folds, right? And then it starts out with a prosencephalon, a mesencephalon, metencephalon, and a myelencephalon. And then it further breaks down into a telencephalon, and then you have a rhombus. You don't have to know all those crazy terms, but basically you have the higher brain, the midbrain, the lower brain. And the higher brain, of course, is going to have the cerebral cortex. And this would, just like you had a frontal bone, an occipital bone, and a temporal bone, you have a frontal lobe, occipital lobes in the back, and you have the temporal lobes, and you have parietal lobes. And so one of the things you notice about the brain here, you have these folds, and the folds are to increase the surface area because the brain is, the cerebral cortex is bigger than any other part of the brain, the human. And these folds form a high point like a mountain ridge and then a valley in between, or a groove, right? So the top is called a gyrus. Let me have that for a second. Sure. So the top of the mountains are called gyri or gyrus, and the sulci are the grooves, right? And so you have one that's really important, and that's called the central sulcus. And that would be this one going across here. It's called the central sulcus. And then you have the pre-central gyrus and the post-central gyrus. These are two important ones, and they're associated with sensory and motor, right? So you have the pre-central gyrus and the post-central gyrus and the central sulcus in between. Then, if you look at this from the side, you can see the cerebellum here, and then you can see the brain extending down, and in front is the pons. So what I'm going to do is take it off this way, and you can see this in your book too. You have that view here, right? And what you're seeing here is the cerebral cortex. It shows you the pre-central gyrus, the central sulcus, and the post-central gyrus. Remember I talked to you guys about the homunculus man the other night? That's where you find that, inside there. So three-dimensionally through, in your book, you see the drawing of the homunculus man, which maps out the motor and the sensory. Pre-central gyrus, I believe, is motor, and post-central gyrus, I believe, is sensory. Double check me on that. Maybe I'm not feeling so good, so I could have that off. So now, right here, this is called the corpus callosum, and that's the connection from the right and left side of your brain. And then this right here in between, this is the lateral ventricles. Now, what is a ventricle? The ventricle is where the cerebral spinal fluid is going to flow. So you have this nice image in the book here that shows you the ventricles of the brain. Now look at this. This is showing you the choroid plexus where you're going to be forming the fluid. So the fluid forms in the choroid plexus. What happens is you have this interchange between the vanules and the ependymal cells are going to drain some of the plasma and form the cerebral spinal fluid. So this is your lateral ventricle. There's one on either side. On either side you have a lateral ventricle. Here you can see it here, lateral ventricles. And then you have the third ventricle, which is down in the middle. The third ventricle would be right in the middle here. The third ventricle would be around this area here. And then you have the cerebral aqueduct. Where is that? The cerebral aqueduct drains back down. So from the lateral ventricles, it drains into the interventricular foramen, into the third ventricle. So from each lateral ventricle, it's going to drain into the third ventricle behind the thalamus here and surrounding it. And then it goes into the cerebral aqueduct, which then goes down into the fourth ventricle. Like today, we just did the sheep brain over at the other school, and I had them take the probe and run it right through it. You could just kind of run it through like a space there. This is your pons, this is your cerebellum. Okay, and then right here, this is your medulla. This area right here is important. This is the thalamus area. You're going to have the hypothalamus right here. This section right here. So it's kind of like an imaginary, like little triangle here almost. That's the hypothalamus. The epithalamus would be above. The whole thing is called the thalamus. Coming off the thalamus would be the pituitary gland, which some of them don't have coming off of it. You can't really see it. And then you have the mammillary bodies. This would be a mammillary body. And then in the back, you have the pineal gland. Let's go to this picture, you can probably see it better. Here. I'm upside down here. So here's your thalamus, right? There's your hypothalamus. This is your thalamus. And then, is the pineal gland there? I'm not showing it, though. I have to see it on another image, I believe. Remember I talked about the pineal gland with sunlight, right? That's your circadian rhythm. Have you heard of that? The circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is your sleep-wake cycle.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah. Pineal gland is right there, the little tiny thing. That's it right there. That little tiny guy right there. Okay? All right? So that's basically it. Let's keep it simple. Cerebral cortex, I told you about the gyri and the sulci, precentral gyrus, central sulcus, postcentral gyrus. Corpus callosum connects left and right. Lateral ventricle, choroid plexus, the red. Behind here would be the third ventricle, and this is the cerebral aqueduct going into the fourth ventricle here. This is the thalamic region, this is the hypothalamus. The pituitary would be coming off of that, and that's your pineal gland, cerebellum, pons, and medulla.